I realized I wasn't a guest at my son's anniversary party when I couldn't find my name on the seating chart. I stood at the entrance of the country club ballroom, smoothing the front of my navy dress, the one Daniel had once said made me look elegant, Mom, like those women in magazines. The room glowed with soft golden lights, crystal chandeliers casting reflections across polished marble floors, and for a moment, I allowed myself to feel proud. 20 years of marriage. I had been there from the beginning, through their first tiny apartment, through the sleepless nights when their first child was born, through every milestone that had built this evening. I stepped forward slowly, scanning the welcome table where neat white cards were arranged alphabetically, each guest's name written in looping calligraphy. My fingers hovered over the rows, moving from A to C, then to H, then to M. I paused, blinked, and started over, slower this time. Margaret Collins. It wasn't there. I told myself I must have missed it. Perhaps they'd placed me at a special table, closer to the front, maybe even with Daniel and Sophia. That would make sense, wouldn't it? A small smile touched my lips as I turned toward the seating chart displayed beside the ballroom doors. Guests clustered around it, laughing, pointing, taking photos. I waited my turn, patient as always, then leaned in just enough to read the names. Table 1, Table 2, Table 3. I followed each list carefully until I reached the bottom, where a smaller section had been added almost as an afterthought. Additional guests. And there it was. Not my name, not even a proper place. Just a single line. M. Collins, Table 12. No title, no relation. Just an initial, like I was someone who had RSVP'd at the last minute. I felt something shift quietly inside my chest. Not a sharp pain. Not yet. Just a subtle awareness that something was off. Still, I smiled. I've always known how to smile when things feel wrong. It's a skill you learn after decades of keeping a family together. I picked up a glass of champagne from a passing tray and walked into the room as if nothing had changed. Conversations flowed around me, laughter rising and falling like music, but there was a distance I couldn't quite name. People nodded politely, a few offered quick greetings, but no one stopped me for long. I noticed how Daniel stood near the center of the room, one arm resting lightly on Sophia's back, his posture relaxed, confident, like this was exactly where he belonged. He didn't see me at first. Or maybe he did and chose not to show it. I couldn't tell anymore. Sophia, on the other hand, saw everything. Her eyes flicked toward me for just a second, her smile never faltering. But there was something in that glance, something calculated, like she was checking a box on a list only she could see. I made my way to Table 12, tucked near the far corner of the ballroom, close enough to hear the music, but far enough that the stage felt like another world entirely. The chairs were half empty. A couple I didn't recognize sat quietly across from me, their conversation polite but distant. I placed my purse on the table and folded my hands in my lap, taking a slow breath. It's just a party, I told myself. Just a small oversight. But as I looked around the room, at the laughter, the speeches beginning to form, the careful perfection of it all, I couldn't shake the feeling that this night had been planned down to the smallest detail. And somehow, I had been placed exactly where they wanted me to be. I kept my hands folded neatly on the table, my fingers resting lightly against the cool linen, as if that small act could anchor me in place. Across the room, glasses clinked softly, and a ripple of laughter moved through the crowd, warm and effortless, the kind that usually makes you feel included even if you are not part of the conversation. Tonight, it only reminded me how far away I was from everything that mattered. A server passed by and refreshed my champagne without asking, the bubbles rising in a steady stream that I watched for longer than necessary. It was easier to focus on something simple, something predictable, than to look up and meet the subtle avoidance in people's eyes. I noticed how no one asked why I was sitting there, at the edge of the room, how no one seemed surprised. That was what unsettled me the most. Not the distance, not the quiet, but the feeling that this arrangement had been understood by everyone except me. I lifted the glass to my lips and took a small sip, careful not to smudge the rim with my lipstick, a habit I had kept for years, even when no one was watching. Old habits stay with you long after they stop being noticed. On the stage, Daniel tapped the microphone lightly, testing it, his voice carrying just enough to draw attention without demanding it. Conversations softened, chairs shifted, and all eyes turned toward him. I felt that familiar pull in my chest, the instinct to look at my son the way I always had, with pride first, questions later. He smiled, confident and composed, thanking everyone for coming, his words polished in a way that suggested they had been practiced more than once. Beside him, Sophia stood perfectly still, her hand resting lightly on his arm, her posture elegant, her expression warm but controlled. She knew exactly how to be seen. I listened as Daniel spoke about their journey, about building a life together, about sacrifices and growth, about the future they were planning. The words were right. Every sentence sounded like it belonged in a celebration like this. But there were small things, details that did not quite settle. He spoke about their first home, but he did not mention how I had helped with the down payment. He spoke about long nights and hard work, but not about the weekends I had spent watching their children so they could have those moments. It was not what he said. It was what he left out. I shifted slightly in my chair, the fabric of my dress brushing softly against the wood, and for a moment, I thought about standing up, about walking closer, about reminding him, gently, that I was there. But the thought passed as quickly as it came. That was not who I had ever been. I did not step into moments that were not offered to me. Instead, I stayed where I was, watching, listening, piecing together something I could not yet name. At the next table, I caught fragments of a conversation, voices lowered but not careful enough. Someone mentioned renovations. Another mentioned timing. And then a phrase that lingered, just long enough to settle into my thoughts. After tonight, everything changes. I did not turn my head. I did not react. I simply let the words sit there, quiet and heavy, as if they had been placed gently into my hands without anyone noticing. I looked back toward the stage, at the two of them standing together under the soft lights, and for the first time that evening, I felt something sharper than confusion begin to take shape. Not anger. Not yet. Just the slow, steady realization that whatever this night was meant to celebrate, it was also meant to mark an ending. And somehow, I was the only one who had not been told. I remained seated for a few moments after the applause faded, letting the sound dissolve into the soft hum of conversation that followed, as if nothing important had just been said, as if the words had not carried weight beyond the stage. My glass was still half full, untouched now, the bubbles long gone, leaving only a flat surface that reflected the chandelier light in a dull, steady glow. I traced the rim lightly with my finger, not out of habit, but to give myself something to focus on while my thoughts arranged themselves into something clearer. Around me, people leaned toward one another, their voices lowered again, conversations picking up exactly where they had left off, as if the speech had been nothing more than a brief interruption. I noticed how quickly the room moved on. That was the thing about carefully planned evenings. They were designed to keep moving forward, no matter what might not fit perfectly beneath the surface. I adjusted the bracelet on my wrist, the one Daniel had given me years ago, a simple silver band that had once felt meaningful in ways I did not need to question. Tonight, it felt lighter, almost like it belonged to someone else. I glanced toward the stage again and saw Daniel stepping down, shaking hands, accepting congratulations, his smile steady, practiced, unchanged. Sophia remained close to him, guiding the flow of guests with subtle movements, her hand resting on an elbow here, a gentle nod there, always directing without appearing to do so. She caught my eye again, just briefly, and this time there was no warmth in her expression, only a quiet acknowledgement, as if she had been expecting me to understand something without being told. I looked away first. It was easier that way. At the table beside mine, a man leaned closer to his companion, his voice low but not low enough. I did not intend to listen, but the words reached me anyway, carried on the easy rhythm of people who believe they were not being overheard. "They are finalizing everything next week," he said, his tone casual, as if discussing a business arrangement. The woman beside him nodded, her eyes flicking toward the stage. "It is about time. That place is too valuable to just sit there like that." I felt my hand still against the glass. I did not move. I did not turn. I simply listened. "And she has been there for how long?" the man continued. "Decades," the woman replied, her voice softer now. "But you know how these things go. It is their turn. Their turn." The words settled quietly, like dust finding its place after something has been disturbed. I inhaled slowly, careful to keep my expression unchanged, and let my gaze drift across the room once more. The decorations were flawless, every detail carefully chosen, every arrangement intentional. Nothing here had been left to chance. That included me. I understood that now. I stood up slowly, smoothing my dress again, not because it needed it, but because the motion gave me a moment to gather myself. I picked up my purse and stepped away from the table, moving through the room with the same measured pace I had always used, the same quiet presence that had never demanded attention. No one stopped me. No one asked where I was going. I passed by the stage, close enough to hear Daniel laugh at something someone said, close enough to see the ease in his posture, the comfort of someone who believed everything was exactly as it should be. For a moment, I considered speaking to him, just a simple word, just enough to see if anything in his expression would shift. But I did not. Some answers do not come from asking. Some truths reveal themselves in what is already being done. Instead, I continued walking, following the hallway that led away from the ballroom, the music growing softer with each step until it was nothing more than a distant echo. The air felt cooler there, quieter, untouched by the warmth of celebration. I paused for a moment, my hand resting lightly against the wall, and allowed myself to think clearly for the first time that evening. Whatever they were planning, whatever was being finalized, it had been set in motion long before tonight. And if I wanted to understand it, I would have to stop waiting to be told and start looking where they assumed I never would. I moved slowly down the hallway, my heels soft against the carpet, each step quieter than the last as the music behind me faded into something distant and almost unreal. The walls here were lined with framed photographs, moments captured in polished black frames, weddings, anniversaries, celebrations of families that looked whole and complete. I paused in front of one without meaning to, my reflection faintly visible in the glass, layered over a smiling couple I did not recognize. For a moment, I stood there, not thinking, just breathing, letting the stillness settle around me. Then I turned and continued walking until I found the small office near the end of the corridor, the door slightly ajar, a thin line of light spilling into the hallway. I hesitated only briefly before placing my hand against the door and pushing it open just enough to step inside. The room was quiet, untouched by the noise of the party, a desk neatly arranged, a lamp casting a warm, steady glow across the surface. There were folders stacked in careful order, a laptop closed but not put away, and a faint scent of paper and polished wood that felt oddly familiar. I closed the door behind me, not fully, just enough to muffle the sound from the ballroom, and stood there for a moment, listening, making sure no one had followed. When I was certain, I stepped closer to the desk. I did not rush. I have never been someone who rushes into things. Instead, I let my eyes move slowly over the surface, taking in each detail, each small clue that might explain what I had begun to suspect. A folder lay slightly apart from the others, its edge not perfectly aligned, as if it had been opened recently and placed back without the same care. I reached for it, my fingers steady despite the quiet tension building beneath the surface, and lifted the cover. The first page was filled with legal language, dense and precise, the kind that demands attention even when you do not want to give it. I read the first line, then the second, my eyes moving carefully, deliberately, as the meaning began to take shape. Property transfer agreement. The address was unmistakable. My home. The house I had lived in for over 30 years. The place where every memory seemed to live in the walls, in the floors, in the quiet spaces between rooms. I felt my breath slow, not quicken, as I continued reading. Names followed. Daniel Collins. Sophia Collins. The words were clear, final, leaving no room for misunderstanding. I turned the page, my hand still steady, and found the timeline outlined in clean, measured steps. Preparation. Review. Finalization scheduled. After tonight. The phrase echoed in my mind, connecting itself to the whispers I had overheard, to the careful distance, to the way everything had been arranged just out of my reach. I did not feel the sharp shock I might have expected. Instead, there was a quiet clarity, a sense that something I had not wanted to see had finally come fully into view. I closed the folder gently and placed it back exactly where I had found it, aligning the edges with the same precision it had been given before. My reflection caught in the dark screen of the laptop, a faint outline of a woman who looked composed, unchanged, as if nothing had shifted beneath the surface. But I knew better. I stepped back from the desk, my hands resting lightly at my sides, and allowed myself one long, steady breath. They had planned everything carefully. Every detail, every step. They had chosen the timing, the setting, even the moment. And they had assumed that I would remain exactly where they had placed me, quiet, distant, unaware. I turned toward the door, my hand pausing briefly on the handle, and for the first time that evening, I felt something settle into place within me. Not anger, not fear, just a calm understanding that whatever came next would not unfold the way they expected. I opened the door just enough to slip back into the hallway, easing it closed behind me with the same quiet care, as if nothing inside that room had been disturbed. The music from the ballroom drifted toward me again, soft and distant at first, then gradually louder with each step I took, until it wrapped around me like it had before. But it did not feel the same anymore. Something had shifted, not in the room, not in the people, but in the way I saw it all. I walked slowly, not because I needed time, but because I wanted to feel each step, to let the calm settle deeper, to make sure nothing in my expression betrayed what I now understood. When I reached the entrance of the ballroom, I paused for a moment, my hand resting lightly against the doorframe, and watched. The party continued exactly as it had before, laughter rising and falling, glasses clinking, conversations flowing without interruption. No one looked toward the hallway. No one noticed that I had been gone. That, more than anything, told me how carefully I had been removed from their awareness long before tonight. I stepped back inside, smoothing my dress again, the gesture automatic now, and made my way along the edge of the room. I did not return to table 12. Instead, I moved slowly past it, letting my gaze drift across the faces around me, searching without appearing to search. I saw Daniel again, standing near the bar this time, speaking with a man I did not recognize, his posture relaxed, his tone easy. He looked comfortable, certain, as if everything he had planned was already secured. Sophia stood a few feet away, speaking with a group of guests, her laughter light and perfectly timed, her movements precise in a way that suggested nothing was left to chance. She was in control of this room, of this night, and, until now, she believed she was in control of everything that came after it. I stopped near one of the tall windows, the glass cool beneath my fingertips, and allowed myself to look out into the dark beyond, where the reflection of the ballroom hovered faintly against the night. For a moment, I saw myself there, standing still while everything behind me moved forward without hesitation. I thought about the house, about the years that had settled into every corner, about the mornings that had begun in quiet routines and the evenings that had ended with familiar comfort. I thought about how easily something so permanent could be turned into a line on a page, reduced to signatures and timelines and plans made without me. But the more I stood there, the clearer something else became. They had not simply taken a step. They had assumed I would never take one of my own. I let that thought settle, not as something heavy, but as something steady, something that could be held without shaking. When I turned back toward the room, my eyes moved with more purpose, not searching now, but noticing. The details were all there if you looked carefully enough. The way certain guests avoided mentioning the house. The way conversations shifted when I drew too close. The way Daniel's gaze passed over me without stopping, not out of cruelty, but out of certainty that there was nothing left to address. That certainty was their mistake. I reached for another glass of champagne from a passing tray, lifting it with a steady hand, and held it for a moment before taking a small sip. It tasted the same as before, crisp and light, but it no longer felt like something meant to be enjoyed. It felt like something to mark a moment, a quiet point where one understanding ended and another began. I lowered the glass slightly and allowed myself one last glance at the stage, now empty, the lights still warm, still inviting, as if waiting for the next part of the evening to unfold. They believed that part belonged to them. They believed the night would end exactly as they had planned. I stood there, calm and composed, and understood that for the first time, they had planned something without knowing who they were planning it against. I set the glass down on a nearby table without finishing it, my fingers releasing it gently, as if even that small sound might draw attention I did not want. The room continued to move around me, effortless and unaware, while something inside me began to move in a different direction entirely. It was not sudden. It did not rush forward. It unfolded slowly, like a memory returning piece by piece, each detail finding its place with quiet precision. I had always believed that understanding comes with time, that clarity is something you earn by looking back, not by forcing answers in the moment. And so I let myself look back, not at the documents in that office, not at the whispers I had just heard, but at everything that had led here. Small things at first, moments that had once seemed too minor to question. The times Sophia had insisted on handling paperwork, saying it was easier that way. The way Daniel had gradually stopped asking for my input, not abruptly, not noticeably at first, but enough that decisions began to happen around me instead of with me. I remembered the afternoon they suggested I move my things into the smaller bedroom, just for convenience. How reasonable it had sounded at the time, how I had agreed without hesitation because I believed it was temporary. I remembered the way the mail had started arriving less frequently, how bills and statements seemed to be managed before I even saw them, how I had trusted that everything was simply being organized more efficiently. Each memory, on its own, had felt harmless. Together, they formed something else entirely. I stood still near the edge of the room, my posture relaxed, my expression unchanged, but inside, the pattern was no longer something I could ignore. It had not begun tonight. Tonight was simply the moment it became visible. I glanced toward Daniel again, watching the ease in his movements, the confidence in the way he spoke, and I realized something that settled deeper than anything else I had felt so far. He did not look conflicted. He did not look uncertain. There was no hesitation in him, no sign that he believed he was doing something wrong. That meant he had convinced himself of something. That whatever they were doing was justified, reasonable, perhaps even necessary. That belief did not come overnight. It had been built, carefully, over time. And Sophia had been the one shaping it. I did not need to hear her words to understand that. I had seen the way she guided conversations, the way she redirected focus, the way she made suggestions that sounded like solutions. She did not push. She arranged. She created a path and allowed others to believe they had chosen it themselves. I had admired that once. I had thought it meant she was capable, organized, strong. I had not realized what it could also mean. I let out a slow breath, barely noticeable, and shifted my weight slightly, grounding myself in the present again. The past had given me what I needed. Not anger, not regret, just understanding. And understanding has a way of changing everything without making a sound. I turned my attention back to the room, to the people, to the movement of the evening as it continued to unfold, and for the first time since I arrived, I was not trying to fit into it. I was observing it, measuring it, seeing it for what it was rather than what I had hoped it would be. They had built this night with intention. Every detail, every moment, every step towards something they believed was already decided. But decisions are only final when everyone involved agrees to them. And as I stood there, calm and steady, I realized that they had moved forward without ever asking whether I would agree at all. I did not move right away. Instead, I let the realization settle fully, like something that needed to take root before it could grow into action. Around me, the evening continued to unfold with careful elegance, waiters gliding between tables, soft music shifting into a slower rhythm, conversations deepening as the night went on. It was all designed to feel effortless, but I could see the structure now, the way each moment led into the next, guiding everyone toward a conclusion that had already been decided. I remained near the edge of the room, watching, listening, allowing the space between things to reveal more than the things themselves. That was when I noticed him. He stood near the far end of the bar, slightly apart from the others, his posture straight but relaxed, his expression thoughtful rather than engaged. He was older, perhaps in his late 60s, dressed simply compared to the rest, but there was something familiar in the way he carried himself. It took me a moment to place him, and when I did, the memory came back clearly. Jonathan Harris, my husband's attorney. I had not seen him in years, not since the estate matters were settled after my husband passed. He had always been precise, measured, the kind of man who spoke only when necessary and never without purpose. I watched as he glanced around the room, his eyes moving carefully, as if he were observing more than attending. Then his gaze found mine. There was no hesitation in his expression, no polite confusion, only recognition. He gave a small nod, almost imperceptible, and set his glass down before making his way toward me. I did not move to meet him. I simply waited. When he reached me, he did not smile in the way others had tonight. His expression remained calm, steady, as if this were not a social encounter, but something more deliberate. "Margaret," he said quietly, his voice low enough that it did not carry beyond us. "I was hoping I would find you here." I inclined my head slightly, acknowledging him without drawing attention. "It has been a long time, Jonathan," I replied, keeping my tone even, as if we were exchanging nothing more than a simple greeting. He glanced briefly toward the center of the room, where Daniel and Sophia stood surrounded by guests, then back to me. "Yes," he said, "long enough for certain things to be misunderstood." The word lingered, chosen carefully, and I felt a small shift in the air between us. I did not ask him to explain. I did not need to. Instead, I held his gaze, allowing the silence to do what it often does when two people already understand more than they say. He reached into the inner pocket of his jacket and withdrew a slim envelope, plain and unmarked, holding it in his hand without offering it yet. "Your husband was very particular about how things were to be handled," he continued, his voice steady, controlled. "He believed in preparation, in making sure that no matter how circumstances changed, certain outcomes would remain protected." I felt my breath steady, not quicken, as his words settled into place. Protected, not transferred, not given away. Protected. He extended the envelope then, placing it gently into my hand, his fingers releasing it without urgency. "I believe you should review this," he said. "Not later. Now." I looked down at the envelope, its weight light but unmistakable, and then back up at him. "Why tonight?" I asked quietly. He held my gaze for a moment longer before answering. "Because tonight is when they expect everything to become final," he said. "And it is also the last moment before they realize it will not." The music swelled slightly in the background, a shift in tempo that signaled the next part of the evening, but around us, everything felt still. I did not open the envelope immediately. I did not need to rush. Instead, I held it carefully in my hand, aware now that whatever had been set in motion long ago had not been left unguarded. My husband had known something, had planned something, and Jonathan had come here not by accident, but because this moment required it. I gave a small nod, acknowledging what had just been placed into my hands, and for the first time that evening, I allowed myself the faintest trace of something that was not confusion, not quiet observation, but certainty. Not everything had been taken from me. Not everything had been decided without my knowledge. And whatever came next would not belong solely to them. I waited until Jonathan stepped away before I opened the envelope, not out of hesitation, but because I wanted the moment to belong entirely to me. The paper inside was folded once, precise and deliberate, and when I unfolded it, the words revealed themselves with the same quiet authority I remembered from years ago. It was not a long document. It did not need to be. The language was clear, direct, and impossible to misunderstand. The house had never been solely mine to give, nor Daniel's to take. It had been placed into a protected trust, established by my husband before he passed, with specific conditions that could not be altered without my consent. My consent. The phrase settled into my thoughts with a steady weight, not heavy, not overwhelming, just certain. I read it once, then again, allowing each line to fix itself in place, to replace the uncertainty that had lingered all evening with something far more solid. When I folded the paper back into the envelope, my hands were steady, my breathing even, as if nothing in me had shifted at all. But everything had. I lifted my gaze and looked toward the center of the room again, where Daniel and Sophia were now preparing for the next part of the evening. A small stage had been cleared, the microphone adjusted, the attention of the room beginning to gather once more. This was the moment they had been building toward. The announcement. The final step. I could see it in the way Sophia moved, the subtle precision of her gestures, the quiet anticipation in her expression. She believed this would be the moment everything became official. I stepped forward then, not quickly, not with urgency, but with the same measured pace I had carried all evening, weaving through the room with quiet ease. No one stopped me. No one questioned my movement. To them, I was still exactly where they had placed me. That was their mistake. I reached the edge of the gathered crowd just as Daniel lifted the microphone again, his voice carrying clearly as he thanked everyone once more, his tone warm, confident, assured. He spoke about new beginnings, about growth, about the future they were stepping into together. The words were carefully chosen, polished, designed to sound natural, while guiding everyone toward what came next. I stood there, just close enough to be seen, but not yet the center of attention, and waited. Timing has always mattered. It is not about speaking first. It is about speaking at the moment when no one expects it. When Daniel paused, just briefly, as if preparing to introduce something more, I stepped forward one final pace. It was not a large movement, not dramatic, but it was enough. Enough for him to notice. Enough for Sophia's gaze to shift. Enough for the room, slowly, almost imperceptibly, to begin to quiet. I did not raise my voice. I did not interrupt. I simply stood there, meeting my son's eyes with a calm that held no anger, no accusation, only clarity. He hesitated, just for a second, something uncertain flickering across his expression before he covered it with a practiced smile. "Mom," he said, his tone light, as if this were a pleasant surprise. "I did not realize you were." He did not finish the sentence. He did not need to. I inclined my head slightly, acknowledging him, and took another step forward, the envelope still held lightly in my hand. "I believe this belongs here as well," I said, my voice steady, carrying just enough to be heard without needing to rise. There was a brief pause, the kind that stretches longer than it should, as attention shifted, as curiosity replaced certainty. Sophia's smile did not fade, but I saw it tighten, just slightly, the smallest fracture in something carefully maintained. I extended the envelope toward Daniel, not as an offering, not as a request, but as a simple fact placed in front of him. "Before anything becomes final," I continued, "there is something you should read." The room had grown quiet now, not completely silent, but enough that every word carried further than intended. Daniel looked at the envelope, then at me, his confidence no longer as steady as it had been moments before. For the first time that evening, he was not certain. And as I stood there, calm and composed, I understood that certainty had shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, but completely. Daniel did not take the envelope immediately. For a brief moment, he simply looked at it, then at me, as if trying to understand how something so small could interrupt something so carefully prepared. The room held its breath in that quiet, expectant way that only happens when people sense a shift but do not yet understand it. Finally, he reached out and took it, his fingers brushing the edge of the paper with a hesitation that had not been there before. Sophia stepped closer to him, her hand lightly touching his arm, a gesture that might have seemed supportive to anyone else, but I could see the tension beneath it, the subtle pressure, the silent question she was asking without words. Daniel opened the envelope slowly, unfolding the document with the same careful precision he had used moments ago to hold the room's attention. But this time, there was no speech prepared for what he was about to read. His eyes moved across the page, once, then again, and I watched as something shifted in his expression, something that could not be smoothed over with a practiced smile. It was not shock in the way people expect. It was quieter than that. A realization settling in, piece by piece, replacing certainty with something far less stable. The silence stretched, longer now, noticeable, and a few guests exchanged glances, their attention fixed on the stage without fully understanding why the moment had stalled. Sophia leaned in slightly, her voice low, controlled, but I could see the way her composure tightened as Daniel did not respond the way she expected. He did not speak. He did not move forward. He simply lowered the paper slightly and looked at me again, this time without the easy confidence he had carried all evening. "Mom," he said, his voice softer now, uncertain in a way I had not heard since he was a child trying to understand something beyond him. I held his gaze, steady, not unkind, but not yielding either. "It seems," I said quietly, my voice carrying just enough to reach him and those closest, "that not everything was as final as you believed." There was no accusation in my tone. There did not need to be. The document spoke for itself. The truth did not require emphasis. Around us, the room began to shift, the energy changing as people sensed that something important had just taken place, even if they did not yet know what it was. Sophia's hand fell from Daniel's arm, her posture adjusting almost imperceptibly as she recalculated, as she tried to find a way to regain control of a moment that had slipped beyond her reach. But some moments cannot be reclaimed once they have passed. Daniel folded the paper again, slower this time, as if each movement required more thought than it should have, and for the first time, He looked not at the crowd, not at Sophia, but at me with something closer to understanding than assumption. I did not step closer. I did not explain. I did not fill the silence they had created. Instead, I allowed it to remain, because silence has a way of revealing what words often hide. After a moment, I inclined my head slightly, a gesture of acknowledgement rather than conclusion, and turned away from the stage. I did not wait for a response. I did not need one. As I walked back through the room, the same room that had felt so distant before, I noticed the difference, not in the way people looked at me, but in the way they paused, the way their conversations faltered just slightly as I passed. Not out of judgment, out of awareness. I reached the exit without being stopped, without being called back, and stepped into the cooler air outside, the quiet settling around me in a way that felt honest for the first time that evening. Behind me, the music would continue. The evening would find a way to move forward, as it always does. But I did not turn back to see how. Some endings do not need to be witnessed to be understood. I walked down the steps slowly, my posture steady, my pace unhurried, and allowed the night to close behind me. They had planned everything with care, every detail leading toward a conclusion they believed was inevitable. What they had not planned for was the one thing they could not control: me.